The fateful year 60 AD arrived, a year when the threads of destiny intertwined, foreshadowing unprecedented turmoil. On the northernmost frontiers of the vast Roman Empire, in lands that had reluctantly yielded to imperial will, 17 long years had passed since the legions, like sea monsters, crossed the English Channel and landed on the shores of mysterious and wild Britannia. At this pivotal moment, in the heart of Celtic lands, news of the demise of Prasutagus, the powerful chieftain of the Iceni tribe, echoed across the fens and forests. Prasutagus, known for his loyalty and friendly disposition towards Rome, had ruled for many years as a client king. The imperial administration, therefore, expected that upon his death, all his territories and wealth would fully pass into the great empire's possession. However, his last will seem to be dictated not only by concern for his descendants but also by a deep, desperate desire to ensure the safety of his lineage. In his will, he declared that his immense riches and extensive territories should be divided between Nero, the all-powerful emperor of Rome, and his own 2 daughters. Prasutagus sincerely believed that such an act of generosity and trust would guarantee his family's inviolability under the shield of imperial protection. But his hopes were cruelly dashed, and his calculations proved a fatal error, for Rome knew no mercy when it came to power and possessions. The imperial administrators, blind to foreign customs and deaf to pleas, contemptuously rejected the part of the will concerning the deceased chieftain's daughters. With ruthless greed, they seized every possession, every parcel of land belonging to Prasutagus. What was meant to be protection turned into utter devastation. Publicly, before her own people, they subjected Boudicca, Prasutagus's widow, to humiliating flogging, her grief and rage now burning brighter than any pyre. And her daughters, young and defenseless, suffered an even more terrible fate. They were dishonored, their dignity trampled, their future overshadowed by unbearable pain. The most prominent Iceni nobles were forcibly removed from their positions, their influence destroyed, and their status brought to dust. Lands that had belonged to their families for centuries were declared legitimate spoils of the conqueror, without a shred of doubt or respect for ancient traditions. When the wave of plunder and violence somewhat receded, and the air was filled only with the groans of the humiliated and whispers of outrage, Boudicca emerged from the shadows. In her hand, as if an extension of her indomitable spirit, she clutched a spear, a symbol of determination and a threat to anyone who dared to meet her gaze. Her appearance, filled with grief and fury, inspired awe, and every word that escaped her lips was laden with unbearable pain and a call for vengeance. She delivered a speech that would forever remain in the annals of history, a speech capable of igniting the flames of rebellion in the deepest corners of the soul. You have learned from your own experience the vast chasm between true freedom and humiliating slavery. Therefore, though some of you, perhaps previously unaware of a better fate, were deceived by the Romans' false and tempting promises, now, having drunk the bitter cup of both, you have undoubtedly realized what a monstrous mistake you made when you preferred imposed tyranny to your inherent, free way of life. These words were merely the beginning of what was to erupt on British soil, and the reverberations of their echo would be felt for centuries to come. The ancient Roman historian Cassius Dio presented a vivid portrait of Boudicca, describing her as a woman, very tall of stature, in appearance most formidable, in the glance of her eyes most fierce, and her voice was harsh. The growing anti-Roman resentment was fueled precisely by such egregious acts committed by the occupiers. As a result, not only did the neighboring Trinovans tribe join the Iceni in their struggle, but other local peoples secretly sent their warriors to assist the Iceni. Meanwhile, the main body of Roman legions was actively campaigning on the Isle of Mona, and news of the great rebellion led by the Iceni queen reached them only after some time. The first strategic target attacked by the rebel forces was Camulodunum, a Roman colony founded by military veterans who had participated in the large-scale invasion of the island in 43 AD. The choice of this target was not accidental but deeply calculated. The veterans residing there treated the native population with exceptional cruelty and systematically oppressed them. Another significant source of popular discontent was the magnificent temple erected in Camulodunum and dedicated to Emperor Claudius, the ruler who had initiated the conquest of Britain just 17 years prior. As Tacitus aptly noted, this monumental temple seemed to the Britons a citadel of eternal slavery. As Camulodunum possessed no defensive fortifications, it swiftly fell to the rebels' assault. However, the temple itself, fortified by the colony's valiantly defending veterans, managed to hold out for 2 more days. Boudicca, driven by an unyielding thirst for vengeance for the humiliation she and her daughters had endured, took no prisoners. All inhabitants of the colony, without exception, were mercilessly slaughtered. Following the classical Roman approach, the 9th Legion Hispana, led by Quintus Petilius Cerealis, decided to advance immediately towards the heart of the rebellion, seeking to seize a strategic advantage. However, Cerealis managed to muster only limited forces, apparently, the first cohort, perhaps 2 more, as well as auxiliary infantry and a cavalry detachment of about 500 horsemen. The total strength of these troops was likely no more than 2,500 men. Meanwhile, although the ancient Roman historian Cassius Dio claimed that Boudicca had assembled an army numbering around 120,000 warriors, and even if this figure was somewhat exaggerated, the 9th Legion found itself catastrophically outnumbered. The legion attempted to relieve the besieged city but arrived too late and suffered a complete and crushing defeat. Cerealis himself was forced to hastily flee to Gaul along with the provincial procurator, Catronius. After Camulodunum was mercilessly razed to the ground, reduced to ruins, Boudicca directed her forces towards Londinium, one of the province's key trading ports and most important centers. When news of the unfolding events reached Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, the governor of Roman Britain, he immediately undertook a long march to personally lead the suppression of the revolt. Nevertheless, he made the difficult decision not to engage Boudicca in immediate battle, effectively leaving the inhabitants of Londinium to their own fate, though many citizens managed to flee before the settlement was subjected to the most brutal devastation. Suetonius exercised justified caution, considering both the overwhelming number of forces Boudicca had amassed and the disastrous rashness displayed by Cerealis. Instead of rushing into battle, he chose to strengthen his army before engaging Boudicca directly. As reinforcements, the 14th Legion arrived to Suetonius, augmented by experienced veterans from the 20th Legion, as well as auxiliary units from nearby garrisons. However, the 2nd Augustan Legion, stationed in the southwest of the province, defiantly refused to heed Suetonius's call to arms. This legion was halted and prevented from marching by its camp commander, known as the Praefectus Castrorum, Poenius Postumus. Poenius justified his refusal by strategic necessity. He claimed he wished to hold his position in case the Britons changed direction and turned west. Meanwhile, Londinium was completely devastated by Boudicca's forces, whose troops then proceeded to Verulamium. Verulamium, in turn, was a native settlement that Britons, acting as allies of the Roman Empire, had constructed following Roman architectural and urban planning principles. When the rebel forces reached it, the city was mercilessly put to the torch and completely destroyed. Deprived of reinforcements from the 2nd Legion, Suetonius's military strength dwindled to just under 10,000 warriors. At the same time, according to available historical sources, Boudicca had by this point managed to assemble an impressive army, numbering approximately 200,000 people. Faced with such a colossal disparity in troop numbers, Suetonius made the strategic decision to find an optimal defensive position where he could give the Britons an open battle. As Tacitus testifies, describing this critical moment, for this purpose, he chose a place surrounded by woods, with a narrow approach and protected in the rear by a dense forest. In such a situation, he did not fear an ambush. The enemy, as he knew, could only approach from the front, where an open plain lay before him. Such a choice of terrain allowed him to maximally neutralize Boudicca's only significant advantage over the Roman legions, the overwhelming numerical superiority of her troops. It should be noted that her army effectively lacked strict military organization, more closely resembling a scattered armed mob rather than a disciplined military formation. Despite all researchers' efforts, the exact location of this decisive battle has yet to be definitively established. However, it is generally accepted that it occurred somewhere in the West Midlands. Gaius Suetonius Paulinus meticulously organized his troops into battle formation. At the center of his formation, tightly packed, were the legions, forming an unyielding core. In close proximity, ready for swift intervention, were units of lightly armed warriors, designated for action as needed. Cavalry units,